My name is Ethan Ward, and until last Thursday, I thought I had a perfect life. A loving wife, a beautiful son, and a quiet home tucked away in the suburbs. The kind of life people envy without realizing how fragile it is, how easily it can all shatter with one truth. I met Vivian in a small second-hand bookstore downtown. It was raining that day, and I ducked in for shelter and maybe a good novel. She was already there, thumbing through a worn copy of Jane Eyre. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "It always ends the same, but I still love the heartbreak." That sentence stuck with me more than it should have. Vivian had that kind of presence, quiet but magnetic. I was drawn to her before I even understood why. I asked her out that same afternoon. We went for coffee, then dinner, then everything else blurred into a fast, beautiful rhythm. We got married a year later in a tiny ceremony, just close friends and family. She wore a simple dress, no veil, no fuss, just her, glowing in a way I'll never forget. I was sure then, this was it. I had found my person. Vivian and I both wanted kids. We tried, lost one, and it nearly broke us. She needed time away, so she went to stay with her sister for a while. I let her go. I thought space was what she needed to heal. When she came back, she was different, softer, more present, more determined. A few weeks later, she told me she was pregnant again. I didn't question it. I was too busy thanking the stars for giving us a second chance. Then, Aiden was born. The first time I held him, I felt something shift inside me. He had Vivian's dark hair, her wide eyes, and a little dimple on his left cheek. I told myself he had my chin. It didn't matter if he didn't. He was mine, completely. He called me Dad before he even learned to say Mama. Every moment with him felt like a reward for every hardship Vivian and I had faced. I took pride in the father I was becoming. Bath times, bedtime stories, scraped knees and all. Life became normal, good, predictable, until Thursday night. Vivian was already at the kitchen table when I got home. The lights were dim. She had a mug in her hands, untouched. I remember how her fingers kept circling the rim, slowly, like she was trying to rehearse something in her mind. "I need to tell you something, Ethan," she said, without looking up. I froze, halfway through loosening my tie. Something about her tone stopped me cold. "I should have told you years ago," she continued, "but I didn't know how." I didn't say anything. I just sat across from her, waiting. Then she looked at me, and in the softest voice said, "Aiden isn't biologically yours." My world fell silent. I stared at her, blinking, trying to process the words. She explained that during the weeks she'd stayed with her sister, after our miscarriage, she'd met someone. She didn't name him, said it was a mistake, said it meant nothing. "But when I found out I was pregnant," she whispered, "I knew, and I chose not to tell you because you loved him. From the start, you loved him more than I thought anyone could love a child. I was afraid of losing that, of losing you." The mug in her hand was still full, cold now. I stood up without speaking and walked out the front door. The sky outside was deep red, like it had bled into the night. My breath caught in my throat, heavy and unfamiliar. I couldn't think, couldn't feel. Because the woman I loved had built our life on a lie. And as I stood alone in the dark, a more chilling thought crept in. If she'd hidden this from me, what else was buried beneath her silence?
The days that followed felt like I was walking through someone else's life. Vivian moved through our home with practiced grace, cooking Aiden's favorite meals, humming as she folded laundry, even kissing me goodnight, but her smiles felt like masks, and mine weren't there at all. I couldn't look at Aiden the same way, not because I loved him less. That was the cruel part. I still loved him like my own flesh, But now, every time I saw his eyes, I found myself searching for a stranger's face, a man I'd never met, whose name I didn't even know. He was somewhere in those eyes, in the way Aiden tilted his head when he was curious, or how he laughed with that sharp inhale first. Details I used to find charming now haunted me. At night, I sat awake while Vivian slept beside me. I stared at the ceiling, counting cracks, listening to her breathing. I kept wondering, had she ever planned to tell me, or would she have carried this lie to her grave? One morning, while Vivian was out with Aiden, I opened the drawer she always kept locked in her study. I'd never had a reason to touch it before. Now I had dozens. The lock was flimsy. I used a thin knife and popped it open with a guilty ease. Inside were sketchbooks, old receipts, a few photos, and a stack of handwritten letters tied with black ribbon. The handwriting wasn't hers. They started innocently enough, short updates. Hope your trip went well, or I think about that night more than I should. Then deeper, regrets, apologies, promises. Some were dated just before Aiden was born, some after. The sender never signed a full name, just M. I flipped through them, my pulse climbing with each page. The words were romantic, but tinged with guilt. He missed her. He wanted to see her again. He wondered what their son looked like. I dropped the letters like they'd burned my skin. There had been more than one lie. Vivian hadn't just hidden the truth. She'd kept the connection alive. Maybe not in person, but emotionally, she never let him go. That night, I couldn't hold it in. "Who's M?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. Vivian didn't answer right away. Her fork paused midair before she set it down carefully. Aiden sat between us, focused on his macaroni, blissfully unaware that his parents were unraveling right in front of him. "I told you everything," she said, barely above a whisper. "No," I replied. "You told me what you had to, not what you chose to." She didn't look at me. That hurt more than the lie. After dinner, I stayed in the garage for hours. Not to think, just to escape. The silence there felt less suffocating than the silence inside the house. Aiden came in looking for me. He held one of his drawings, a family portrait. Me, Vivian, him, and a dog we didn't even have. "Why are you out here, Dad?" he asked. The word dad hit me like a hammer. I forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "Just fixing, buddy." But I wasn't fixing anything. I was crumbling. Later that week, I noticed something strange. Vivian's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. The screen lit up with a message preview. "You need to tell him. He's starting to see it. M." My chest tightened. See what? I stared at the message, hands trembling. Before I could stop myself, I opened the thread. There were weeks of texts, nothing overly romantic, but there was tension, secrets, warnings, a sense of urgency. And then, one message stood out. "He can't find out what really happened. You promised." My fingers froze. What really happened? I backed out of the thread and placed the phone back exactly how it was, screen down. In the mirror that night, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were sunken, jaw clenched, and my reflection seemed to whisper things I didn't want to hear. Vivian didn't just cheat. She was hiding something worse. And I was about to find out just how deep the lie ran. The following days felt like living in two worlds. One where everything looked normal, calm dinners, school pickups, neighborly small talk, and another, buried beneath the surface, buzzing with suspicion and shadows. I began to observe Vivian closely. Her phone habits changed. Every time she received a message from someone saved as M, she'd step into the bathroom or kitchen, staying longer than necessary. Her hands would tremble slightly when she returned, her face pale. She thought I didn't notice, but now I saw everything. My curiosity turned to obsession. One night, after she fell asleep, I opened her laptop. It took a few tries, but I finally got in. Most files were harmless: grocery lists, family photos, work documents. But one folder stood out.
It was named Memories, and it was locked. I tried the usual passwords, Aiden's birthday, our anniversary, even Vivian's old email logins. Nothing worked. Then I remembered the date from one of M's emails, a strange reference to something only the two of them would know. I typed it in. Unlocked. Inside were a few short videos. I clicked one. Vivian appeared on screen, younger and visibly pregnant, laughing as she cradled her belly. Behind the camera, a man's voice, definitely not mine, spoke softly to her. They talked about moving out of the city, starting fresh, raising a child somewhere no one would find them. If he finds out, the man said, we lose everything. Vivian replied, he won't. He trusts me too much. I paused the video. My hands were cold. My chest tightened. This wasn't just infidelity. I was part of a plan built on lies. I wasn't her partner. I was her cover. The next day, I pretended to be sick so I could stay home while Vivian and Aiden left. As soon as they were gone, I searched deeper. In the back of our closet, hidden beneath old linens, I found a box wrapped in a worn sweater. Inside, a black and white photo of a man who looked disturbingly like Aiden, a hospital document, and a birth certificate I'd never seen before. The father's name on that certificate wasn't mine. But the worst was the hospital file, dated just 2 days before Vivian and I got married. It included a genetic test result and, at the bottom, a handwritten note from a doctor. Patient refused to disclose results to spouse, requests all communications be directed to M. Official stamp, signature, no doubt it was real. I sat on the floor, the box in my lap, every part of me unraveling. She had planned this, married me to hide something, raised Aiden with me while keeping the truth locked away in folders and boxes. And all this time, she made me believe it was real. That night, when Vivian came home, something caught my eye. Her old jacket, one she hadn't worn in months, had faint smudges of dirt along the hem, as if she had been digging or burying something. "Where were you?" I asked quietly. "Visiting a friend. Aiden was playing in her backyard, lots of mud." She said too quickly, too rehearsed. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. Who was M? Where was he now? And then a new thought formed, a terrifying one. What if M had never left? What if he was still around, watching? I couldn't get the dirt off my mind. Vivian's jacket, the smudges near the hem, small but unmistakable. It wasn't just a child's muddy footprints. It was dry, flaky soil, like it had clung to her from underground. And that night, when she stood by the sink, washing her hands longer than usual, I noticed the tiny cuts on her knuckles. She hadn't said anything. The next morning, when she took Aiden to school, I stayed behind. I told her I had a client call, but the moment the car turned the corner, I stepped outside and walked toward the back garden. A chill wind brushed past me, as if warning me not to go further. Vivian had been in the garden more than usual lately. At first, I thought it was her way of coping with stress, digging, planting, trimming the hedges, but now I saw things differently. One particular spot caught my attention. Near the edge of the yard, just behind the old rose bush. The soil was darker there, looser, disturbed. I fetched a spade from the shed, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Every dig felt like peeling back a layer of lies. 6 inches in, the dirt gave way to something unusual, plastic. Not just any kind, heavy-duty, black, the kind used to wrap large items. I froze. My heart banged against my ribs. Carefully, I cleared more earth, revealing the edge of a sealed plastic bag. I hesitated. My mind raced through every possibility. Trash? Old tools? A pet's remains? But I knew better. I tugged at the corner, and as the dirt loosened, the contents shifted. Metal clinked against something solid inside. I peeled it back just enough to see. Inside was a box. And not just any box. A lock box. I wiped off the grime and hauled it to the patio table. It was cold to the touch, sealed with a rusted latch. I cracked it open with a screwdriver, and what I found changed everything. Documents, dozens of them. Old letters addressed to Vivian under a different name. Photos, grainy, faded ones, of her with a man I'd never seen before, but who looked far too much like Aiden. One photo chilled me more than the rest. Vivian, pregnant, standing in front of a small rural clinic. The man beside her had his arm around her. On the back, in faint ink, read, August 2015, our fresh start. That was 3 months before I met her. I kept digging through the contents. Passports, 2 of them. One had her current name, the other a name I'd never heard. But both had her picture. There were bank records too. Several transfers from an unknown account, regular, consistent, sent to a name that started with M. Then I found something even worse. A restraining order filed by Vivian against someone named Michael Langston. The details were minimal, but the complaint was clear. Psychological manipulation, stalking, threats. I blinked hard, trying to process. Who was Michael? Her ex? A dangerous one? The real father? Had she been running from him or working with him? I didn't know what was worse, that she'd kept all of this from me, or that even now, after years together, I wasn't sure who my wife really was. That night, I didn't confront her. Instead, I followed her. She told me she was going to a book club. I waited 10 minutes, then got in the car and drove. I kept my headlights off as I trailed her from a distance. She turned into a side road, one that led not to any bookstore, but to an old, shuttered property just past the edge of town. I parked far enough not to be seen. Vivian stepped out, phone in hand. She looked around before walking into the abandoned house. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then I saw a man. Tall, hooded, thin build. He walked out of the shadows and greeted her. They didn't hug, they didn't even speak, at least not loudly. But she handed him something small, a flash drive or maybe a key. He nodded once, then vanished behind the side of the building. Vivian left shortly after, her expression unreadable. Tired? Guilty? I couldn't tell. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, thinking about Aiden, about how he looked nothing like me, about how long I'd been living someone else's script, and worst of all, what else she might be hiding. Because if that man was Michael, and she had a restraining order against him, why meet in secret? And if he wasn't, then who the hell was he?
I followed Vivian again the next night. This time, she didn't go to the same abandoned house. She drove past it, deeper into a wooded area just beyond the outskirts of town, somewhere I'd never even realized existed. Her taillights disappeared around a bend, swallowed by trees. I waited a few minutes before creeping forward. She had parked beside a rusted metal gate, long forgotten by the city, half swallowed by overgrowth. Beyond it, a gravel path led to a crumbling farmhouse with a flickering porch light. And despite the decay, I noticed signs of life: newer tire tracks in the mud, faint light from the upper window, smoke trailing from a chimney. Vivian slipped through the gate like she'd done it 100 times before. I followed on foot, staying in the shadows. Through a cracked window, I watched her step into the kitchen and place a bundle on the counter. Envelopes, money, and something else, a framed photograph. Even from a distance, I recognized it. It was of me and Aiden, taken last Christmas, smiling, happy, a memory I didn't even know she had captured. Then a voice, quiet, low, male, responded from inside. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw Vivian's reaction. She flinched. She turned away and gripped the counter like she was holding back tears. He stepped forward, the man from before, the one from the abandoned house. And then I saw his face. It was my face. Not exactly, but enough of it. Older, gaunter, but unmistakably related. The man who had haunted the background of every mystery, every question, every shadow, was my brother, Michael Langston. The name on the restraining order.
The one my family had told me died in a fire when we were teenagers. Suddenly, the pieces rearranged themselves in my mind. Michael never died. He disappeared. My parents covered it up, said it was suicide. I never questioned them because I was too young, too angry, too broken. Now, here he was, standing across from my wife, holding the photograph of my family in his hands. Vivian turned to him and said, barely audible, "This has to end, Michael. You said 1 drop, 1 vial. That's all you needed." My breath caught. Michael stepped closer. "And I used it, Viv. You have my word." "Then why do you keep asking for more?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the photo again. He doesn't even know, does he? Vivian shook her head. I backed away from the window, my mind spiraling. 1 drop, 1 vial. My hands trembled. Was Michael sick? Dying? Or was it something far more sinister? I waited until she left, then followed her car home, staying far behind. When she pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, I sat in my car a block away and stared at my shaking hands on the steering wheel. Back home, I confronted her, not with accusations, but with silence. I laid the old photograph on the kitchen table. She stared at it, her face draining of color. "You went there," she said, not even asking. I didn't respond. Vivian sat down slowly, as if her body had become too heavy. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "I didn't know you were his brother when I met you, I swear." And just like that, I understood the unthinkable truth. Vivian had met Michael first, years ago. They'd been together briefly, until Michael vanished again. She thought he was gone for good, until she met me, and married me, and had a child. But the resemblance, my face in Aiden's, had started to haunt her. She dug into my past, found the old family photo albums, discovered Michael and I were brothers, twins, once inseparable, until the fire, the disappearance, and the lie. Vivian had kept it from me because she didn't want to lose what she had. But Michael had returned. He had found her again, not for love, but for something else. That's when she told me the most disturbing part. Michael was obsessed with legacy, with creating something permanent, genetic perfection, he said. He believed Aiden was his, even though Vivian insisted he wasn't. Still, Michael had taken hair samples, toothbrushes, and had been experimenting. "He's not trying to hurt Aiden," she said through tears. "He thinks he's saving him from you, from what your family did, from what your bloodline hides." That night, I didn't sleep. The next day, I called the police, but when they arrived at the farmhouse, it was already empty. The place had been burned, again. All that was left were ashes, heat, and the smell of charred memories. Michael was gone. So was any evidence of his presence. But the fear lingered. Sometimes I catch Aiden staring at old paintings on the wall, ones I didn't hang. And when I ask him who drew them, he says, "The man who smiles like Daddy." I don't know if he's talking about me or Michael. All I know is I lock the doors now, I sleep lightly, and I check under Aiden's bed every night, just in case the family I buried decides to come back. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be a living key to a past you were never supposed to uncover? This story reminds us that some family secrets aren't buried, they're simply waiting for the right moment to crawl back into the light. Trust can be a fragile thing, and sometimes love and lies grow from the same root, tangled and impossible to pull apart without tearing everything down. Vivian thought she could bury her past. He thought he'd lost his brother forever. And yet, fate has a twisted way of forcing unfinished stories back into the spotlight. What haunts this family is not just betrayal, but the denial of truth, generation after generation. What if the people closest to us know more than they ever say? What if someone out there is watching us, not with hate, but with obsession, a twisted sense of love? If this story made your heart race, if it left you looking over your shoulder, don't forget to like the video. It helps more than you know. Got a theory about Michael or a favorite moment that made you gasp? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe to Burned by Love, where stories of obsession, betrayal, and chilling truths are revealed every week. We have more twisted tales coming your way, each darker and more unforgettable than the last. Until then, keep your doors locked and never ignore the past.